So on that note, I'm going to invite Gina. I'll read some quick words about her. So Gina is a certified grief recovery specialist, life transitions coach, and a graduate of Fuller Theological Seminary. She is a self-described hope junkie who loves to journey with others by helping them validate the whole of who they are in the world and in their lives. So with that, I'll go ahead and welcome her to the stage.
So, hey. Okay, this is at the point when you respond, hey. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I know it's Saturday evening. Everybody's had a long week. And so I am Gina Pollard. It's an interesting thing that I get to do because since I do so much grief work, I'm a lot of fun at cocktail parties, talking about grief and death and loss. People will say things to me like, I know I need to come see you, but I don't want to cry. I'm like, okay, I get that part, but you're going to cry sometime, either with me or without me. So as long as you're crying somewhere, I'm good with that. I first got involved in grief work because I was working with a church, with a nonprofit that does work with women whose lives have been impacted by incarceration. So if you've heard of the Kairos Outside movement, that's what I was a part of for 10 years. Excuse me. And prior to that, I had been doing abuse ministry. So people who were dealing with sexual, physical, emotional neglect, narcissistic relationships, that kind of abuse. And I knew that people were sad, but I wasn't really sure why they were sad or what was going on. And so at a weekend with Kairos Outside, I was talking to a woman and she said, my boyfriend doesn't understand why I'm crying all of the time because ever since my son went to prison. And I thought, sometimes you have a knowing. It's that thing that is like deep in your essence and you know what you know, what you know, and you have no reason to know that. I'm so sorry. Said to her, oh, it's because you're grieving. And then all of a sudden, all of the thoughts came, boom, 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 boom. All of the people I had sat with that were crying, that were feeling broken, that were lost, there was so much grief. And so I want to go ahead first and start with this video. Has anybody seen The Danger of a Single Story? Yeah. It's really such a great, great, great video. So I'd like for you to watch this, and then we'll launch into more of what we're going to talk about tonight. I love that video because a single story is how we view the world. It makes it easier for us to pigeonhole people into a particular group because it allows us to turn off our mind and not really listen to them, and also not really strive to see how they are and who they are at all. So consider this. Sorry. Here it is. They said, don't read that. Don't ask that. Don't talk to those people. Don't date that person. Don't marry that person. You'll question your faith. You'll lose your faith. You'll lose your salvation. We can no longer be part of your life if you do that. And so some of us stayed at the party for a really long time. Long after we felt welcome. Long after we were shamed for asking questions. Long after the spiritual abuse had already seared its way into our hearts. And maybe, for some of us, we were able to walk or crawl away when we had had enough or were banished. And so the wondering continues, coming unbidden at the weirdest times. Even when we are feeling rock steady, we wonder if we had done the right thing. Sound familiar? For those of us who had been steeped in long-time traditions of religion and doctrine and dogma, we were certain that we held the truth, that those people out there had no clue what was going on. And if they only would see things our way, then they would understand the real truth, until our way shifted, or until we got exposed to something else and someone else. You've all been talking over the last several weeks about interfaith. For some of you, that was a very courageous thing to begin to explore other faiths. Because no matter where your deconstruction has put you, there is still sometimes that fear about, well, maybe I'm not supposed to do that. Maybe there's something wrong. And the other thing that has happened for you is that you have found out that you really didn't know a whole lot about the other faith that you thought that you knew. And that, as Chaminanga says, she watched people going to work and smoking cigarettes and having tea just like she had known. Because this is what we forget, that on the other side of the label is a person with hopes and dreams and desires that are shared. Mothers and fathers want the best lives for their children, whether they have the tools to know how to do that or not. We as people are always, always, always searching for connection. You know, I think that two of the biggest desires that we all have in terms of a deep connection is to know others and to be deeply known. And then when we add to that the idea that we want to be accepted exactly where we are. There's such an interesting thing. C.S. Lewis talks about it. Brene Brown talks about it. It's that magical moment when we look at somebody else and we say, you too? I thought I was the only one. There is just an amazing connection when that happens. Unfortunately, we get taught in a lot of places that that shouldn't happen. When we talk about interfaith marriages, for example, there's a lot of similarity between interfaith marriage, interracial marriage, intercultural marriage, so let's not confuse race and culture, and also when we begin to question our faith. So the things that are similar are things like we look at questions like, what do I really believe? What is really important about faith? How do I deal with traditions and questions? Where and how do I need boundaries? It's a different way of looking at the world. Here's what I know from the grief work that I do, is that when certainty dies, the idea that I know, and I'm absolutely dead certain that I have all of the answers, and the rest of y'all are wrong. Even if we believe the same thing, I'm looking at it through my lens, you're looking at it through your lens. When the certainty leaves, nothing is safe anymore. Because if I'm wrong about this, maybe I'm wrong about that. If the church lied to me about this, maybe they lied to me about that. You know, it's the whole, I'm trying to see where the kids are. You know, it's that whole thing about those childhood figures that we grow up believing in that are like magical. And when we realize that perhaps that wasn't the truth, so what else have people not told me the truth about? It's like if you're involved in a romantic relationship and suddenly you find out that the other person has told you a lie, then the question becomes, what else have you lied about? What else do I not know in my life? And so then when that happens, then it becomes a matter of losing your sense of identity, okay? Because we make meaning out of how we fit into certain social structures. We make meaning about our worldview, and for those of us that have been in church for a long time, that worldview is determined by church leadership or the Bible as we understand it in our tradition. We always got to make sure that we're putting that there, because that's why we have 450 denominations at least. It's because everybody's reading the same doggone book and everybody has a different interpretation of it. Wars have been fought over where Jesus fits into the Trinity, And so church history is really, really fascinating about the stuff that people have died over. And so it becomes a question of, what do I know? Where do I fit in? And then the other part of grief that happens with that is that people start to disappear from your lives. And they disappear for a couple of reasons. One of those is that if you start questioning, then they're going to start questioning, and they don't feel comfortable with the questioning. And then it's like, oh, no, you're a mess, and I can't deal with a mess because you don't have any answers, you just have questions. Anybody relate to that part of it? Yeah. And then the other part of that is, it is the idea that questioning is catching, that it's contagious. That if you start doing that and you lose your faith, your salvation, your group, whatever, then I might catch it too, and I don't want to do that because I'm scared and I need to hold on to exactly what I've known and be the good, whatever denomination or whatever religion you have come from. So the same thing happens when we talk about interfaith marriages. Because the question gets asked, oh, if you're marrying a Catholic, then are you going to start, and go with me here, are you going to start worshiping Mary? Because for many Protestants, that's what they believe. Are you still going to be a Christian? Oh, they're going to change your mind about the proper way to do communion. What are we going to do about the kids? What kind of celebrations are we going to do at the holidays? What kind of religious instruction are we going to provide for the children? So you understand that as people start to go away from you, it gets really lonely. And if you don't have other people that are on the path with you, then it becomes lonelier still. So there's a great deal of grief that happens when we go through deconstruction, or we enter into an interfaith relationship, or we simply begin to question what's right, what's wrong, does anybody have an answer? Seeing a lot of nodding heads right now, understanding that this liminal space that we live in can be hell. It really can. So today, I want to be really, really honest about what it looks like to grieve. I'm going to give you some information about grieving, and then we're going to talk some more, and I'll have some time for questions if you have them as well. So the one thing that I think is really important for you to know, first of all, is that grief is not just about somebody dying. At the Grief Recovery Institute, we talk about over 45 different kinds of losses that you can have that can result in grief. 45. Wow, bet you didn't know that, huh? Bet you didn't understand that. Because grief is the normal and natural reaction to change. A few years ago, a lot of years ago, I'm an old broad, what do you want? There was a book called Who Moved My Cheese? And at the basis of that book, it's really about things have changed, and I don't know what to do now that things have changed, and how do I be? Because it's all about the being. How do I settle into this rhythm? I don't know what to do. It's a new role. So I want to talk about losses because even good things can be a loss. So if you're single and you get married and you really liked being single, the idea of coming home in the evening and not having to talk to another human being and putting on that favorite ratty nightshirt or t-shirt or whatever it is that you wear that really no other human being should see, you've got one. Yeah, you all have one. Don't even try in front, because I know better. Or maybe I'm just talking about myself again. Who knows? Those are the things that you're going to miss. Those are the things that you may miss, okay? Yes, it's exciting to get married and to plan a life together with somebody or move in with somebody. And there are advantages to being single and living by yourself as well. If you get a promotion at work, hopefully you're getting more money with that promotion. These days in the job market, it's a little hard to tell. The people that you used to hang around with and complain about the boss with, maybe you're the boss now. And you've lost that sort of us against the world mentality, and those relationships change. And now you've got more responsibility, and maybe it would have been easier had that not happened. Moving is a huge loss factor. If you are downsizing, there are memories from an old home that you had that you're now feeling like you're losing. Maybe you had to get rid of some cherished kind of possessions, that kind of thing. I see a lot of divorce. And a lot of death of a loved one because it's the end of a relationship. And depending on who you're talking to, they're not sure whether it would have been better if that ex-partner had died or if they had just gotten divorced. And in some cases, those are not happy relationships to begin with. When I left my very violent and mean-spirited ex, my mother said to me, "Of course you're going to miss him. If you had a really ugly wart on the end of your nose and you had it removed, you would still miss that wart because it was what you were used to." I was like, oh, that kind of makes sense a little bit. So even though I was relieved to be out of that relationship, there was a real sense of loss, because there's also the loss of what might have been. So unmet expectations are also the things that come along that we have to deal with. If your desire had always been to have kids, and now you find yourself at 50 and you're not having children, there may be wistfulness with that. So understand that loss can come up in any number of ways. I see a number of clients with pet loss too, because our fur babies are family, and I don't care who you are, but the fur babies are family, and when they die, it is really hard for us because of the unconditional love. The other part of the definition of grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the change of a pattern or unrealized dreams or hope, and reaching out for someone or something that you're used to being there and they're no longer there. Because we get into habits and now we don't know what to do with those habits. So there are some problems that happen when we're grieving. In Western society, we are taught how to accumulate things. We are not taught how to lose things. You know, we work really hard to continue to get that next thing, and nobody teaches us what to do when finances turn around, when a relationship doesn't work out, when your kid decides that they no longer want to speak to you ever again. I deal with that a lot as well. People say really unhelpful things to you too. They tell us to keep busy. They tell us to replace the loss. How many times, those of you who've had a breakup or a divorce or are widowed or are widowed, did somebody say, "It's okay, you can find another one"? Okay, that's really short-sighted, and it's really not helpful at all, because the relationship is different with those. I'm going to move this like way out of the way so I don't fall. Grief is socialized as not natural. We always want to assign a timeline to it. With people who have deconstructed their faith and either walked away from the faith or gone back in a different way, what happens is it's like, I left, we're going to use evangelicalism as an example. I left evangelicalism 10 years ago, and why am I still triggered every time my radio accidentally gets stuck on K-Love? Okay? You think I'm joking, but some of you are laughing because you get it. So there are things that will happen, that will come up. I see a lot of people where family members or friends keep trying to bring them back into the fold. Okay, I'm just going to tell you right now, there are so many people praying for my salvation right now because they are convinced I'm going to hell because I'm not condemning the things that they want me to condemn, and I'm loving the people that they don't want me to love. And I have a 2-word response for them that I won't use at this particular point in time because it would not be appropriate given the circumstances and the building. But most of you, those of you who know me, know exactly what I'm saying because you know my favorite words. People will not let you go. And sometimes it can make you wonder if you have made the right decision. Yes, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands. But once you make a decision to go in one direction, the question is, should I have made this decision? What should I have done? And are people still going to love me? And it can be hard to find a new community. We are taught what is known. And so one of the problems that I have with a lot of religious institutions has been that the pastor and the church leadership are the only holders of truth, and anybody who dares to disagree with them is therefore a heretic and should be banished. There's no room for doubt, and there's no room for questioning, and there's no space for people to sit and say, I don't know. I got a chance recently to deliver a message about God being outside of gender. Well, the church that I delivered that message at was loving it because those are my people. We sort of get it. But I got to tell you, some of the responses from some people on social media who heard that that's what I was talking about were less than kind and less than grace-filled. Because what do you mean God is not a man? What do you mean God is outside of gender? My Bible says that we always use the male pronoun for God. And so, yeah, that's a whole other faction that's praying for my salvation because clearly I didn't learn anything in seminary. Moving on along. Here's the other thing. The next point is that grief is cumulative. I was talking to a group earlier today about grief and mental health in the Black community. And somebody came up to me afterwards and was talking about things that happened when they were 5 years old that they're still not able to get over. I don't like that phrase, but to move through. And that every time something else happens, it's like it piles right on top of that because they've not had the opportunity to work through that. Some of you guys have been through a lot of stuff in a little period of time, and you're feeling like if one more thing happens, I'm going to lose my mind. I like to use the analogy of a beach ball underwater, which works out really great for a little while. So you can suppress, you can hold things down, and then it's like your arms start to shake from fatigue. And then the next thing you know, the ball is starting to slip. And when it finally releases from your grasp, what happens? It ricochets all over the place and will hit people and things in the way without impunity, or with impunity. So understand that it's cumulative and we have to do something about it. Churches need to be places for people to talk about the grief of deconstruction. Churches need to be the place for people to sit quietly and not have to worry about being questioned to within an inch of their life about where they are and what they're doing, and isn't God great? Because I don't care what kind of faith you have, there are days when it does not feel like God is great. And you need to have the faith, you need to have the space to be able to say that. Some of the other problems is that nobody's prepared to help. People say, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do. When we talk about death, grievers say all the time, nobody mentions the name of the person that died. And the people that are not grieving, that are trying to soothe them, will say, but I don't want to make anybody cry, I don't want to make them sad. It's like they're going to cry anyway. They're going to be upset anyway. Give them an outlet to talk about what's going on. I have a very, very dear friend who's lost her 16-year-old son to suicide. Her family does not mention anything about his birthday, the day he died, or any other significant things. It's as if her 16-year-old son never existed. How hard is that? It's really, we have to acknowledge that crap happens, you guys. We know it anyway. So why should it be that communities are not giving people an opportunity to talk about their loved ones? In my practice, I spend a lot of time just listening to people, and I will say to them, tell me about your loved one. I want to get a sense of who they were and what you loved about them, or maybe what drove you crazy about them. What made it hard for you? People are scared of our feelings. They don't want to talk about death. They try and change the subject, and they would rather fix than hear. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and tell you that if I hear one more person quote Romans 8:28, that all things work together for good, I'm going to hurt somebody seriously. Okay? It may make you feel really good to say that, but it's really not helpful. There may be a time for that, and if there's a time for that, please use the whole passage and not just the little chunk that you like to use, because context matters. Words matter, context matters. People get really uncomfortable with feelings, and so we will give you a hearty pat on the back, tell you you're so strong, you're doing so well, and then make a beeline for the door. Because I don't know how to sit in your uncomfortableness. I don't know how to deal with your tears. You're making me uncomfortable, and I don't want to make you cry, and I don't know the right magic combination of words to say to make it all better. When your marriage has fallen apart, when you've lost your job or lost your house, or somebody close to you has died, there are no magic words. There are no magic words. There are only people who will sit next to you and listen to you. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were saying that when their loved one died, a neighbor came over and said, I'm doing laundry. She didn't ask the question about what is it that you need for me to do, because grievers can't tell you what they need to have happen. The neighbor just came in and said, gather up all the laundry, I'm doing the laundry for you. And did it, and folded it and put it reasonably where she thought it needed to be. But the fact was that the laundry was done. It didn't need to be perfect, but it was done. So do something or nothing, just sitting next to them. Here's what we know. I understand that. Were any of you here when Kathy Escobar came and spoke here? Anybody? The book Faith Shift is a book that you will want to read. It is an amazing, amazing, amazing book. Talks about deconstruction, and she walks you through whether you go through your questioning period and decide on your own theology and you come back to church, or whether you go in a different path. And it's filled with grace and filled with love, and says during the period of questioning, there are a couple of things that happen. It can be painful and often isolating, as Christians are sometimes afraid to voice their doubts or admit to a change of theology. One journalist says, a particular problem in evangelical churches are not set up to explore questions of life, but rather provide their own perceived answers. There can be grief of varying degrees, and even among the joy and relief of finding love and leaving dogma and doctrine behind, there can still be whispers of grief. Here's what I know. I know that the divine is big enough for all of us. That questions are part of our growth, spiritual and otherwise. If you think about scientists, what do? They have hypotheses, and they test out those hypotheses, and that's how we eventually get to a place of knowledge. Kids, when they learn to walk, they stand up, they fall down, they stand up again, and eventually they spend more time on their feet than they do on their butts. You know, the same way that it is even in relationships. When a couple first comes together, there's a lot of, oh my gosh, I love you, you're the best thing in the world. And then the next stage is, oh my God, can you stop chewing so loudly because you're driving me nuts? And then eventually, I got people laughing right now, and they won't look at each other because they know they've had that argument. It's so funny. I'm watching you guys. And so I just love it when I say that. And people are like, okay, we're not going to look at each other right now. And then eventually, if the relationship is going to work out, there is a sort of a coming back together from the way the pendulum swung one way and swung the other way. And there's a place of equilibrium where you learn how to work things out. When you are feeling like the world has fallen apart and you will never feel happy again, and it is dishonoring you feel because you have started to not be doubled over in pain every day, that is when growth comes. Because you see that the work of grief, whether it is dealing with the reconstruction of a deconstructed faith, whether it is the loss of something or a change in a pattern, the work of that is to look at what was, to be able to come through and look at what might have been and put it in a framework that works. Usually it's the framework of those things that you wish had been better, different, or more about the situation. And then to come back and figure out what life looks like now. It's the same way with faith. What does my life look like now? What hill am I willing to die on? What are the things that I know for sure, or that I'm reasonably sure enough about that they're not a stumbling block for me and I don't have to worry about them? For example, one of those things for me is that it's all about love and grace. It's all about love and grace. And love and grace also means love and grace for myself. Okay? It's not just about being a doormat, because that's not love and grace for me. Because when Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, that as yourself part at the very end of it is really freaking important. It's really important that you love yourself. Because we have to love each other out of the overflow of what we're feeling inside. So love and grace mean that I'm going to have a rotten day, and I'm hoping that you're going to just look at me and go, she's pretty okay, and so I'm going to chalk that up to being a rotten day, or maybe we need to have a talk. Gina, let's have a cup of coffee, because I'm concerned about you. Somebody asked me earlier today, should I bring my concerns to a friend who I think is having a really hard time with depression? And I said, yes. Why would you not? If I care about you and I think that you're in danger of hurting yourself or seriously derailing your life, my job is to look at you and say, I have some concerns. Not from a judgy, you need to straighten up, you need more Jesus, whatever you want to say, but from a standpoint of I care about you and I want the best for you. So how can I help you? Let's get some help together. What I know for sure is that there is enough love and grace in the world to go around, that there is no scarcity. And the sooner we learn to live in the abundance of love, the more we're going to be able to help each other when it comes to pain and hurting. I know for sure that as I'm vulnerable with you in telling my story, you feel safer to tell me your story. I know for sure that we belong to each other. My favorite quote is Ram Dass saying we're all just walking each other home. It's so important. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was a new pastor, filled with hubris and sure that I had all of the answers, and I was being my best pastoral counselor to this woman that was involved in a ministry that I knew, and I was not sure why the heck she was not getting all of the gems of wisdom that I was passing down to her, because I was giving her my A game. It was the good stuff. I was putting that MDiv to good use. And finally, and she's struggling with substance abuse, and finally I said to her, so I understand what you're going through. Sometimes my best work comes when I'm a little frustrated and I'm trying not to be Gandhi. I I said to her, I understand what you're going through because I remember being down on my knees looking for something else to smoke. And she just looked at me and she said, are you serious? And I said, yes. When I talk about my active addiction life, it was a real one, and I am not proud of that. And she said, well, if I'd only known that, I would have listened a little closer to what it was that you were saying. Sometimes being real is the best thing. Sometimes being honest about the times when we didn't want to live any longer. It wasn't really that we didn't want to live, we just wanted the pain to end. I find that a lot with people who are thinking about not being here anymore, who are thinking of dying by suicide. It really is more about I want the pain to end. So when we can say to somebody, I've been there, and I wish I could make the pain go away, but I'll be here with you as you walk through it, that is a gift. That's a really important gift. No shame, no judgment, no telling them that they're going to be damned to hell if they do that. So here's my other pet peeve. I just need to let this out for you right now. If you are dealing with somebody, if you are helping somebody who's in a hard time and you are tempted to start a sentence with, well, at least, can you please bite off your tongue and stuff it in your pocket? Because any sentence that starts off with, well, at least, is really Pollyanna and really not helpful to somebody who's in the depths of pain. Because if I have a broken arm and I am in deep, deep, deep pain and you say, well, at least your nails look good, okay. I might actually be really pleased that you told me my nails look good. But the other part of that is that doesn't make the pain go away. Telling me that I need to be grateful doesn't make the pain go away. And so it is when somebody's dealing with loss or grief. My mother is a very interesting woman, to say the least. We have a very complicated relationship. That's me being kind and in church. She understands that what I do is I deal with people who are deep in grief and deep in pain. And oftentimes there's a lot of family drama that goes along with what I do. So there are two things that she always says to me. One of those is, well, I just find when I'm depressed, I just go to the Word and I suddenly feel better. And I'm like, good for you. That's not always the case. Remember I said earlier, you can have Jesus and a therapist. It is possible and advisable to have both. And then the other thing she said is, I know that you deal with a lot of families or a lot of people who are in families that are not healthy. What do you tell them about your family? I looked at her and I sat on the edge of the bed and I said, I tell them that my family has never, ever been a safe place for me emotionally, and I'm okay. And then, of course, the waterworks started. I'm so sorry. And it's like, yeah, it's good. I'm processed through all of that. But don't be afraid to tell your truth. You know, there are ways of telling your truth, and then there are ways of telling your truth, depending on your level of anger. But we need for you each to be healthy so that you can pass on the healthiness. We need for each of you to admit that you're in the middle of figuring out what faith looks like for you and you don't have the answers. We need for each of you to sit next to somebody and say, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be here with you, and I don't understand exactly what you're going through, but I'm here. If you're the person that's going through grief right now, I want you to please understand that you matter and that you are valuable, even in the midst of what you may consider your mess. That although it's extremely hard, it's so important for you to reach out to somebody and say, I'm hurting. Can we talk about this? There is no shame in your game when you're talking about grief. Thank you.